You have got Netflix. No doubt some of you have been watching Narcos. I don't know, has anyone seen Narcos? I thought it was a one show, like 1 hour. After 3 episodes, I now realise it's not a one show. The thing about the Narcos, which is interesting, is about the Colombian drug lords, is that they were paying the government and the police $1 billion a year in bribes. Right? $1 billion, that was what they were giving in bribes. For themselves, they were making much, much more than that. They had a well-paid job. Like, you know, if more money is better, they went to the moon in terms of making money. They went to the moon. But they either got shot or got in jail. Or, you know, it always apart from the story of it seems, when you watch it, it's fascinating to see something so corrupt. But the thing is that their life must have been incredibly stressful. Like to know that you're either going to go to jail or you're going to get shot or your family's going to get shot. So that's an exception for me, all right? Maybe not for you, but for me that would be an exception. You know, so having a well-paid job is a way to good luck. Here's another exception. I'm old enough to know people who have well-paid jobs and they died at 45 or 50 from a heart attack or a stroke. Like not one, but a lot of people. Having a well-paid job is the way to a good life. If you die at 45, you know, I mean, I've known people much more successful than me. I've been alive 20 more years than them. So there's an exception. Of course, you don't have to think terribly creative to now start to say, oh yeah, maybe there's a whole range of things. Maybe this claim, this statement here, is an incredibly simplistic notion. But of course, you see young people, more so young, but not necessarily. You say, right, more money, that's it. You know, the only thing is, more money and I'll be happy. Okay. That may be the case, but have a think about it, you see? Have a think about it. Have a think about it. So instead of looking at things in a focused way, you know, this is my target and more of this is going to make me more. Start to think more broadly and with depth. I think that's the difference of the philosopher, and that's why it's useful for us to bring in the examples of philosophers that you are familiar with, you know, and Confucius and Buddha are two examples that I know a little bit about, because they provide these different angles and ask the different questions. Why? You know, why? Why is the more money thing better? Why is it better? See? You play around with it. You see, it should unsettle you. The thing that's, when people, when they're certain of something, this is it. If I get elected, I will make America great again. The beauty of that is that certainty gives people confidence. You know, I am confident. But of course, it's a trick or a delusion. It depends. The problem of the subject is this. I'm going to teach you a whole range of techniques. If you use them for good, it'll be very good. However, you can use the same things as tricks. See? To rip off people, to manipulate people, to do things which are unscrupulous. They work. Both the same. Exactly the same techniques. See? So it's quite an interesting thing. So we start to say, oh, right, you know, if I want to convince this guy, I'm going to use trick 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to use a bit of number 5 on him as well. And before you know it, he will have given me his phone, his wallet, and I'll be driving his car out the door. And he'll be happy. See? Tricks. People do it every day. So, of course, won't you bring up an exception? Having a well-paid job is the way to having a good life, except I don't want to die when I'm 45 of a stroke. Therefore, having a well-paid job that doesn't give me so much stress that I die before I want to die. That's something. Now you can see that this process could be quite exhaustive. You start saying, oh God, I don't want to die, I don't want to become an alcoholic, I don't want to, I want to live a happy life. You see? It becomes a more complex question. So that's why the Buddha, he looks at your eyes and said, do you really want this, mate? Is this thing that defines you, in fact, what you want? So what's the definition of a good life? So you keep on going. Of course, the subject, one of the techniques that people use is metaphors.
The reason why there are a lot of woolly, or at least imprecise...
So I will make use of metaphors. This is the first simple technique you can use. So if you want to convert this subject into something useful, the first one is to use metaphors. That's it. It'll be surprising to me if you don't use metaphors in your big speech at the end of the semester. It will be surprising to me if you don't find the metaphors that people use in the speeches that they give. And of course, it will be a bit of a waste if you don't use metaphors when you're trying to get important points across beyond the course. So this guy uses a metaphor. You see, the problem with ideas is that they're abstractions. They're totally abstract like this, in the air. The good life, whatever. So what you need to do to make any sense of it, or to enable people to make sense of it, is to bring them down to earth and to represent them through a metaphor. And so that's what this guy does. Alain de Botton is a philosopher. He's an English guy. He writes books about philosophy, critical thinking, and here is his metaphor which illustrates the
precise ideas out there in the world is that many people imagine that you can come up with a good idea without thinking too hard about it. Socrates thought this was crazy, and to bring out the insanity of this position, compared thinking to potting. And no one would imagine that you could make a good pot without at least following some pretty rigorous steps. And yet many people imagine that you could come up with a good ethical idea, an idea on how to live your life, without thinking too hard about it. Socrates went further in his analogy. He actually came up with a distinct method, a Socratic method of thought. He identified 5 distinct steps which anyone who wants to come up with a good thought would have to follow in order to do so. And these thoughts can roughly be summarized as follows. Firstly, look around you for statements that many people would describe as plain common sense. For example, that the best jobs are those which are most highly paid, or that happiness comes from being married. Secondly, try and find an exception to this. Could you ever be married and yet unhappy? Or could you ever be in a very well-paid job and yet miserable? Thirdly, if an exception to this statement is found, it must mean that your statement is false or at least imprecise. And in this case, we find that there is an imprecision. Fourthly, try to nuance the initial statement to take the exception into account. So in our example, realize that it is possible to be quite unhappy in a very highly paid job if it's completely creatively unfulfilling, or to be quite miserable in a marriage if you've married the wrong person. Lastly, you continue this process for as long as possible. You keep trying to find exceptions to your common sense statement. And Socrates said, the truth, insofar as anyone's ever able to reach the truth, lies in a statement which it seems impossible to disprove.
If we test our opinions in this way, Socrates believed, we'll be able to construct trustworthy and watertight thoughts, in just the same way as a skilled potter makes trustworthy and watertight pots.
See the beautiful richness of that, the metaphor. Trustworthy and watertight pots. I'll get the technology right soon enough. It's gone. What am I doing, guys? What's happened? Turn the volume off. That'll. I hope it's not recording in the background. All right, let's go to this. Back here. Okay, So Socrates is saying, thinking is hard work. Thinking is hard work. In business, a lot of people come up with ideas and say, look, this is it. We've got a problem. I know, let's do this. Some walks with me to be like this and this solution. A lot of Australian companies in the late 1990s, they said, Australia is a small place, Asia is a big place, there's a lot of people, let's go there and make lots of money. Right? It's growing wealth, they need stuff, that's it, let's go over. See, it was a good idea. You can see the logic of it. How many people in China? A lot. How many people in the rest of Asia? A lot. They want to buy televisions. There's a market for televisions. There's a market for all sorts of stuff. Construction. So the number of Australian companies who went over there and lost millions and millions and millions of dollars, as long as, it's a long list. The reason, of course, is that they had this basic, very simple idea. There are a lot of people, we haven't tapped into it. All we've got to do is be there and they will buy our stuff. The arrogance that is embedded in the ignorance is embedded by, for those people who know the beer in Australia, Carlton and United Breweries, was owned at the stage by IXL or John Elliott, and he was asked at a conference, when you go to China, are your employees or your big managers going to learn Chinese? And he said, no, Australian, that's what we're going to talk. Everybody talks Australian. Now, of course, if you come from China, it's sort of almost repulsive, that sort of level of ignorance. It's not surprising that they went over there trying to do business like they did in Australia and only talk Australian, not even English, that the people that they were trying to sell their beer to said, no, that's not it. If we go to China, we're going to make lots of money. That's a nice, simple idea. What Alain de Botton would say, it's a very simple idea. What Socrates has said, it's an ignorant idea. And of course, it was proved to be. If we're going to, a Chinese company come to Australia, or an Australian company going to anywhere else, it's not that easy. It's difficult. It's often said that the thing that people least like doing in life is thinking. Watching TV massages the brain. No thinking. Just watch it, goes in. Writing a 2,000-word essay, it's hard work. That's why everything becomes much more attractive to do. Oh, I've just got to go and wash the car or something. See? The thinking is very difficult. So in business, the thinking is strategic planning, organisational structure, rethinking your organisation like this organisation I was telling you about before. It's hard work. It's very slow. You need to have a deep understanding of how things work. If you don't, you just be an idiot. See, if you look up journal articles on do change programs work, like business programs, you'll see that about 70% of them don't achieve their targets. Whether they fail outright or simply don't achieve the aims or the proposed aims of the change, and the answer, the reason why is usually that they simply didn't think it through. We're just going to go in and tell everyone, right, I want everyone to work this way now. I want everyone to hot desk. I want everyone to work from home. I want everyone to whatever. See? The big problem is that people think that thinking or coming up with a new idea is like using a remote control. You go flick, flick, and then we change. But in fact, change is a process and it needs some degree of thought. You know, when people go to India, look at to a Buddhist place, they're expecting to sit down and meditate for hours and hours and hours. See? Whether anything happens in that meditation, of course, is questionable, but you see, it's the opposite. The reason why in the 70s and 80s, when I was 20, India was the place, you know, because it was so opposite. It was so opposite. People recognised that in thinking in Australia is this way, and thinking in India, I'm not too sure why India was the place, but it was. People would go and live in ashrams and go and find a guru and do all this sort of stuff. You see, it was this opposite. So in fact, one of the philosophical thoughts is that every idea suggests its opposite. Everything suggests its opposite. People are attracted by its opposite. You can use the opposite to explore the idea. I'm going to be happy with lots of money, I'm going to be happy with no money. Neither of them are true, of course, but at least you see what they do? They provide the space for you to explore the idea. So when people say, look, I'm doing this, I don't like it, I'm going to quit my job and go and do the opposite of what I've been doing. Become a hippie. The hippie becomes a bank manager. See? Sort of a joke. One of the subjects which I've enjoyed teaching in the last couple of years is entrepreneurship. And one of the stories I tell is of two people I met. They're both, as it turns out, they're both women. They both started up art galleries when they were about 45. They were doing a job. And, you know, everything suggests its opposite. They were doing a job that they didn't particularly like. They had some problem, you know, like life change, divorce. So they thought, I'm going to start an art gallery and make money. See, a good business idea, which was thought out with about as much thought as the proposition I put up before you. Both of them, the business were closed within 6 weeks because they didn't sell any artwork. See? How much did they lose? My guess is somewhere between $40,000 and $100,000. See? Simple ideas lead people into trouble because it doesn't work. I'm going to make money by buying Tats Lotto ticket tonight. I'm going to make so much money. Someone's got to win and I'm going to win. That's it. What a great idea. I'm going to go and, I've convinced myself already. 8 o'clock tonight, I'm going to buy that ticket. It's waiting for me. Right? Those of you that are racing me out the door tonight, you know, you're just as crazy as I am. The rest of you are saying, that's stupid. So that's what Socrates is saying. A lot of the ideas that people have are ill thought out. People haven't thought them through. And of course it creates all these unintended consequences. Socrates is most famous for this statement here. I know nothing apart from the fact of my own ignorance. I know nothing apart from my own ignorance. This is the smartest guy in Greece at the time. He's saying, the only thing I actually truly know is that I know nothing. Now, it used to be sort of a joke. When I first started teaching this, I'd tell this line, everyone would laugh because it sounded like a joke. But in fact, the more that I've been teaching this subject, the more I understand we're getting to the heart of the problem. If you realise that you and the way you think is brought up by the country you're born in, you know, the family and the country you're brought up in, and the education that you've got, and that's created a way of thinking. And there are all these other ways of thinking. Then you end up saying, actually, I don't know much. In fact, I don't know anything. Every time you go to a new country and you hear a language which is spoken, you don't know any of the words. You say, people, of course, a lot of us, I'll say I do, when you go there you feel like an idiot. All these people, little kids, old kids, they're all speaking. I've got no idea. I spent 3 months trying to learn the alphabet of Bangladesh. Still I don't know any of it. It's all just, see? So this is what he's saying. What he actually knows is his own ignorance. Life is full of questions. It's the idiots who are full of answers. The idiots think they know. Look, I'll solve the problem. I am the smartest person on... As soon as people say, I'm the smartest person on the planet, or a version of that, you know that they've got a slight limitation. Because clearly they're not, it doesn't make sense. But it's a way of thinking, you see? The arrogance of ignorance. The last one, of course, is I cannot teach anybody, I can only make them think. I can only make them think. You see how that's possible if the course is effective at all, it should unsettle the way in which you've thought. Right. You see, it should unsettle. If it doesn't, then, so be it. But it should unsettle it, because that's what the great man, we'll call him, the great man said. The only thing, if you can get to that place and say, the only thing I know is that I know nothing. Even though you've had 12 years of education, plus a degree, plus you've done a couple of units here, plus you're something else. All right? The origins of critical thinking. The Socratic problem is that scholars and historians try to find out what Socrates thought. For all of his wisdom, he actually wrote nothing down at all. How do we know? We've got no video of him, we've got no digital recordings of him. So all we know is from his students used to write about him. And his two most famous, there's 4 of them there, his 2 most famous students for mine are Plato and Aristotle. Plato wrote verses and stories, and of course he included the wisdom of Socrates in these. Now, a bit like the other books, to what extent is it accurate? But that's how we know what Socrates did. So there's no proof that he wrote anything, and whatever information comes from these 4 works of Xenophon, Plato, Aristotle and Aristophanes. Now, what about we take a break? 10 past, we'll take a break for 10 minutes. 10 minutes, happy with that? Great. 20 past. That's what I said at the beginning. Whatever I say is within my frame of reference and my perception. So the aim is not for you to sit there and everything Michael says, that's free on my end. Feel free, Oh, you mean for the speech? Have you read the book? All right, yeah. One of the things that when I was sorry to concern. When I first started teaching, students would often come up and say, when we talk about leadership, they'd say, Hitler was a great leader. And
if he was, he would still be here, as he said, my right will last all days.
Well, of course, but so he wasn't a great leader. I always say, people follow him. He said, I can jump out of an aeroplane and I will be able to fly. and he was able to fly until he hit the ground. If you were going to write about Hitler and his thinking, you'd have to read some biographies about him. This is a big job.
Yeah, I know a lot about Hitler, I know a lot about the Germans, I know a lot about history as well, but you won't know that till I give the speech.
Oh, look, I would be wary, and because look, I've read some.
No, I could cancel this idea.
I
I'm
would
just
be-
trying to get a better idea
The-
of this subject.
This is good. It's a good start. Move on. The problem with Hitler, I mean,
There are a lot of problems.
one of the, but the fundamental one was that he was mad.
He was a mass murderer, a warlord.
No, but even all the bad things he did, he was crazy. I mean, he ended up being a drug addict.
He was crazy because of all the scientists who had along with him. Cocaine, crack were all introduced in this time.
Right. But
He was given those drugs to stay awake because he thought he was the ruler of the fatherland.
right. So, but he was crazy.
He had a really strong perception about what he believed, and he made a whole audience believe.
Right, he did. But
So that makes him a good leader.
no. I mean, one of the things is that the Third Reich, of course, the First World War happened. He was in the First World War.
He served in the First World War.
He,
As a messenger.
as a messenger. After the First World War, there was a group who was looking to create a political movement. They found Hitler and they used him.
In the bar.
Sorry, so you know the story. But he.
I even know the name of the bar when it happened.
But he was, before that, he had tried to get into art school, you know this?
I was thinking of Gandhi, but that's really easy. That's something controversial. Is that a good decision?
I would, the best talks are about an argument for change. The best talks are about an argument for change. Okay? So, it's not focused on a person because then that becomes a bit like my favourite cat, see? You see what I mean? So the best talks are ones that are looking forward and saying, this can change, this needs to change. This is a protest about what, you see what I mean? So to go back into,
So change would be good or bad?
well,
You do agree that he brought a good change in the beginning, but then the result was bad.
no, well, look,
And
you
now,
ca-
after years, when you look at it, he is considered as a mass murderer, one who is responsible for the Holocaust. I look at him other than that. Not that he was a great leader, none of that.
yeah, but you
There's a
can't.
lot more
So,
to it.
well, one of the things is that you get a man here, and you say he's got some certain tricks and ways of rising to the top. But the net worth of his life is that he killed millions of people.
His own right was against him.
Yeah, but he was responsible for killing millions of people. So it would be very difficult to put it together and claim he's a good guy. No?
I'm not trying to say it.
Right.
I'm trying to say what he did was
Yeah,
worse.
but- all right, okay.
And
So,
then he got carried away.
so my short answer is I think it's a very bad idea. The second thing is I think that what you're looking for is to change something. You know, like that.
I just need an example.
So you want an example for me? So this is a good question because maybe I'll give you a list next week of why people should become vegetarian. It's been an example, right? Because it's a strong argument. Why? What else have people done? So there. Yeah, so in fact, somebody did that. Somebody did that talk. Yep. All Muslims should.
Was it a girl?
What's that?
Was it a girl?
No, it's a man. No, it's a man. Yeah. So that's an example. So Muslims should not be considered vegetarians. or, what else? I mean, there's been some topics. Women, genital mutilation should stop. So you think in terms of social change, political change, something moving forward. This is his. I am going to make a claim that this should change, and this is how it could change. That's what makes it. Say that again?
How blacks live out of slavery. First they were chained up, now they wear the same chain on their neck and a watch and those expensive garments. Again, they're giving back to the whites.
Right. So that's a good. Look, what I do for you, because you're thinking about it, so that's great. Sketch out a couple of ideas and we'll talk next week. Oh. All right, so the second philosopher, as you can tell, is someone who's from this generation, that is my generation. John Dewey is a philosopher. He was a broad thinker, psychology, philosophy, education. He had a different take on it. I mean, one of the key things was that he said that education was a process of living, not a preparation for it. The initial, my first career was as a school teacher. You know, you go there, you teach people how to add up. I teach children how to add up and divide and spell and do that sort of stuff. And in the 70s, the general thing was that education was specifically preparing you to be a manager, administrator, an engineer or something. I remember the philosophy in Australia about 1995 was very much that even university education was very career focused. The government at the time said to universities, I want you to get rid of any degrees or courses that are not career focused and focus on things like accounting or psychology or engineers or something. And so that the aim of the education machine, we might say, was to simply train people to do a job. Of course, the alternative model, it was about that time, I was up in Queensland and I met a guy from England. He was about 23. And I just finished, so I've been studying, I was a teacher, then I'd studied psychology. And when I asked him what he'd studied, he said, I studied the classics. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, so I did ancient Greece, ancient Greek, ancient Latin, and another of the, so it was all, the whole degree was on the classics. So he could speak Latin, he could speak ancient Greek. And so within my framework of a study as preparing you for a career, I said to him, who's going to employ you, mate? There's nobody who speaks ancient Greeks in the world apart from you. And he said, in England, you can walk into any job. Because the idea there is that if you have learned to understand ancient Greek and Latin and the classic literature, then your mind will be able to solve any problem that it comes across. And so you'll be an asset to this firm as a manager or whatever it is. You see that the actual computer program or the process that you need to learn is a minor consideration. The thing that they're after is not that you've got a badge which says I am an accountant, but that a badge that says I can think, I can learn in different ways. And so it seems as though at that time for me there was no more different sort of way than learning Latin, which I learned for 2 years when I was at school. See? So this is what Dewey is saying. Education is the process of living, not the preparation for it. And so the question, it's very echoey room, so if you talk in here, I can hear it. It sort of the sound comes back and it confuses me. So the problem is that it's not a case of me or anybody else tipping some content in your brain so that you learn it and then that's it. But that you learn about or challenge the way in which you think. And one of the students during the break said, look, something you said before I disagreed with. Am I able to criticise the idea or anything you're presenting? And I said, by all means. In fact, I think that that's where the subject will come alive. Where the subject will come alive. You're all smart people. You've got an idea. Let's have a conversation. At some point we'll have a conversation. Dewey's thinking, he was a leading proponent of the American school known as pragmatism. Do what works. He rejected the dualist epistemology and metaphysics of modern philosophy. A naturalist approach that viewed knowledge as arising from active adaptation. One of the big changes in Western thought, they often go back to 1700s, 1800s, the Renaissance. There is a split between the world of ideas, as in ideas are somewhere up in the middle of nowhere. And then there is the world of things that are hard, like the physical life. And so the philosophers got caught in this abstract world. And then the people who did stuff, they saw philosophy as being a waste of time because they were interested in doing stuff with things, being practical. He said, this doesn't make any sense. the opposites need to be with each other. Of course, if I had been smart enough, I would have been able to have the next slide, which would be the yin-yang symbol. The Eastern symbol, which of course is one of the most famous tattoos. You know, before tattoos became very, very famous, if people go to India, they come back with the yin-yang symbol on them. And of course, the yin-yang is this dualism. You know, so you bring this tension of the two things together. They live together. So you have ideas and real life, or physical, rather than ideas or real life. It's a very practical approach to it. Inquiry should be not understood as consisting as the mind passively observing the world and talking about ideas late in the night when you've had a few drinks. But of course, drawing from these ideas and seeing if they correspond to reality, but rather as a process which begins with a check or an obstacle to human action. So don't start philosophy by saying, what is life? Which of course is what Elaine de Bolton was saying. Start philosophy by saying, look, I've got a problem. And then go about solving that problem. So it's the problem which initiates action. You want to do something, and then you proceed to manipulate the environment to test hypotheses and the issues in a readaptation of the organism to the environment. I mean, I had a quick asking people what degree that their undergraduate was. Of course, a number of you will look at this and say, well, that's what science is. Science is simply saying, look, we've got a problem, we develop a hypothesis, see what works, and then we change as a result of it. See? That makes sense. So he's not talking about Socrates, he's just saying this is a practical thing. That the problem of philosophy is to solve these problems, and once you've solved these problems, then you readapt to to the environment. The organism, of course, in his case, or in our case, is you or me. So we have a problem, I think about it, I test a hypothesis, and then I proceed as if that hypothesis is true. And that may change my clothes, it might change my career, it might change my idea, it might change any other aspect of my life. See? So the metaphor simply becomes not the potter, but this thing of solving a problem. And of course there's no better example of this than the rock climber. Yeah, you know, go to YouTube and find the rock climbing stuff. To see free climbers climb up a face. Big Sur is, you know, there's a Netflix example, a video of them climbing up the Big Sur. They only started climbing it in about 1950. A number of the faces they thought were impossible to climb. One of the faces, the first time they climbed up, it took 3 days. It took 3 days to climb up this face. The most recent example, there's the young guy, about 3 years ago, climbed up the same face in about 3 hours without ropes. See? I mean, watch it, you know, type in Netflix, the Big Sur climbing, I don't know what the thing is. But of course, when they first approached it, they looked at this problem of how do you climb up this thing, and they thought we need to take all this stuff with them. Literally camping gear and food gear and all the things that you need for 3 days on a rock face. Somebody rethought that and said, oh, I can do this without taking any of this stuff with me, and I'm going to climb it. And not only did he climb that, but he climbed another face in the same day. Yeah, sort of, not so pronounced. Yeah, of course there's different philosophies of climbing, but this guy had a very clear philosophy. That world's, you know, according to this source, certainly for America at the time, the best climber in the area. But of course he wasn't an arrogant person, because he knew every time he climbs up there, he's got to solve the problems, and if he doesn't, he falls off. He's only got one chance. So he takes it very seriously. The problem as to where to put his fingers next, he thinks about. You see, he doesn't just say, oh, well, I'll have a couple of drinks and then I'll just climb up. Every move is very, very thoughtful. Every move is very thoughtful. So this is, to me, is a very nice metaphor. It shows that climbing is a problem. Of course, it's not a problem that you can solve unless you've got the skill. There's a range of techniques in climbing. I practice them, finding a way to wedge your finger in as small a block as possible and then lift yourself up on that one knuckle. So there's a skill, there's also muscle strength. You've got to be able to lift your whole body up on one arm. But if you've got the technique and the skill, then you're able to critically solve the problems that you face. That's why if we've got an engineering problem, we'll go to our man over here. All right? We'll find out where at least he's got the critical thinking. If we want animation, we've got our man here. He's got the skills, done a degree in animation. And then with those skills and the creativity, he can solve the problem of whatever it is that we want. And of course we see this all the time. When you see a bad movie, somebody's got the idea and they didn't do it well. It's boring. When someone does a presentation and they haven't got the skills, it's boring. It doesn't work. It doesn't solve the problem. That's why it's useful for you to think about this subject as being a very practical skill. In your life, you will have to do many presentations. I can tell you from my 30 years of doing this sort of thing that most presentations are boring. Okay, we know that. That's not such a bad thing because it's at university. What's much worse is that many, many presentations at a board level, at an organisational level, are worse than boring. They're not only boring, but the person who's presenting them doesn't know that they're boring. Usually students feel embarrassed. They're standing up there in front of people. They know it's boring because everyone's going to sleep, so you're starting sweating. But when people are the owners of the companies, you have to sit and pay attention and pretend you're interested. So then they think everybody's listening. And they waste huge amounts of time and huge amounts of effort on these presentations which don't solve the problem. The problem that they were trying to address was, I want these people to be energised and enthusiastic, motivated to do something differently. People have got the skill to go to sleep. It's possible to go to sleep with one eye closed. It's also possible to go to sleep with two eyes open. So you can do that. People go to sleep and they're listening and they nod their head at the right time. See? There's this range of skills. You can't jump over. That's what the musician is useful for. The guy, when I first got onto that piano piece at the start of the lecture, I watched more or less the whole lot of it. I play the piano, and so I got on the piano and I tried to play what he was playing. I can't. See? Enthusiasm and wanting to do it doesn't matter. Because he's this much better than me. He's got the skills to be able to solve the problems to play that music. If you don't have the skills, you won't be able to solve the problem. In this example, you will fall off the cliff. In a presentation, it will be boring. At university level, at an organisational level, people won't do what they tell you, what you tell them to do. They simply will just go like this. Yeah. When I was a school teacher, we used to sit around in a circle, they have meetings, and the principal was he was an old person, younger than me now, but he was an old person, and he'd say, blah, 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 and we'd say, yes, blah, blah, yes, blah, yeah, And at the end of it, we'd all walk out and say, what was that about? It's a waste. Waste of time. Total waste of time. It happens day in, day out in organisations all across the world. Why? See? Why? They say owning a boat is like standing under a shower and tearing up $50 notes. That's what because it's expensive. Running an organisation and doing stupid things like that is like getting a shredder and throwing through $1,000 notes. Just waste money, you see? Waste money. You don't solve the problem. How is it that somebody could be so delusional that they think that what they're doing makes sense when it doesn't? I don't know. You see, that is a problem for other people. Your problem is that when you are manager or owner of a company or CEO or whatever it is, that you're smart enough to say, it's a waste of time, you know. Nobody's listening to me. I might as well just stop and say to people, look, I realise that you find this boring. We're not going to waste our time anymore. Let's just go back to doing things the same way. See? Then I'll say, yeah, he's a smart guy. He's the smartest person we've had. You know? See? So it's very practical. That's it. The metaphors. Of course, the power of metaphors. Aristotle was the one who said the most powerful thing of all is to understand metaphor. To understand metaphor, if you understand metaphor, you understand all things, which is a very enticing thing. The metaphor, the musician with a challenging piece of music is a problem solving. The metaphor of the sculptor creating a challenging work. This is critical. The metaphor of the MBA achieving your desired outcomes. A large part of my time I correct assignments. My guess is that somewhere between 40 and 60% of students who write the assignments don't actually know what they're supposed to be doing, except for filling paper, writing words. You see, it doesn't make sense. So this critical thinking is, so what is the purpose of it? The MBA graduate trying to identify the way forward, the next step, the one after it, the vision, the adaptation, the many steps. Going through this process of thinking is hard work. You can't go to your astrology chart in the paper and find out what the future is. I mean, of course, you see, like going to the Tesla thing and buying a ticket. You know, you can do it. My word, you can do it. People get stuck at the casino. I'm going to win. I know I haven't won for the last 50 days and I've lost my house and my wife and my kids, but I'm going to win. I know it is. It's going to come around the corner. See? Critical thinking delusion. There's something going on. Dewey's 3 elements. He said that there's got to be a controversy. The first thing, there's got to be a controversy. Something about which the answer is not clear, consisting of opposite claims regarding the same situation. We should vote for this politician or that politician. It's a nice controversy. We should vote for this politician or that. That's a good controversy. Donald Trump is a good guy or Donald Trump's a bad guy. It's a controversy. Right? We can do the same thing for every country, you know. There's an opposition party in. And then the second one is a process of defining and elaborating those claims and finding out some information. Why is he or she a better politician? What's the evidence behind it? Of course, a lot of politics in Australia and across the world is tribal. That means people barrack for their politician rather than analyse them. I always vote for Labor. I always vote for Liberals. I always vote for Greens. Or I always vote for the Pauline Hanson party. See? People, that's it. I don't have to think about it. It's a pattern every time I vote. Like the music, I'm driven by the pattern. I always vote Republican. I always vote whatever it is. The process of defining and elaborating these claims, and then a final decision or a sentence, closing the matter in dispute and also serving a rule or principle for deciding further cases. The reason I'm voting for this person is because they are honest based on the evidence that I have in front of me. And therefore I'm going to vote for people who I decide are honest. Or I vote for you see? You then develop a principle. Because while the rhythms are things which can control us, they're also the things that we need to help us address future problems. So that we're not having existential crises each day. So there are 4 traditions of critical thinking. The first one is analytical philosophy and logic, detecting language tricks, giving reasons and opinions and statements which are judged according to evidence. The first one we spend quite a fair bit of time on. And indeed the language tricks are things that you'll become familiar with by the end I mean, there's a couple of language tricks at the end of this lecture, but the language tricks are things that you will use in both assignments. So you analyse this process of logic and the way in which logic is manipulated to appear, for something to appear logical even though it's not. And that's the whole thing of a trick. Like the magician appears to cut people in half. They don't, but there's a trick, you see. Now, language tricks are used by people who want to strengthen their argument. Have you got any examples of a language trick? Just say no, and then I'll be able to say, well, we'll learn some, and by the end of the semester you'll be able to say, do you know any language tricks? Okay, good, this is it. Beautiful. So by the end of the day you'll be able to say, oh, I know these language tricks, and I'm going to practice them. Try them out. The second one is the natural scientist, the hypothetico-deductive method. Observation leads to plausible explanation, which leads to experimentation and results, and then that leads to confirming or denying the hypothesis. Smoking is good for you. Give him a lot of smokes, give him none. Keep on doing it for the next 10 years. And check in to see who's healthy and who's not. Of course, in 2018 it sounds like a joke. In 2070, whatever that is, in 1970, this was a very contested argument. Highly contested. Of course, it actually wasn't a contested argument because all the science said that smoking a lot of tobacco will be bad for your lungs. However, there's two sides to every story, and the people who were selling tobacco had to think of something. How can we argue against this? How can we argue against it? See? Of course, you don't need to be very creative to think of ways to criticise it. The strangest thing is, when I was a kid, the advertisements always said, smoke this and you will be healthy. Literally. Smoke this and you'll be cool, of course. Smoke this and you'll be healthy. Smoke this and you'll be able to do everything better. A lot of people believed it, not surprisingly, because they used all the tricks in the book. There's a very famous guy called the Marlboro Man. One of the Marlboro, which is a brand of cigarettes, they used to have this guy who was riding on a horse, like John Wayne. He'd stop, take a cigarette, and, he died of lung cancer when he was about 40, I think he was 42. Of course, they didn't put that on the packet. See? So that you can see that the second method of the natural science method, of course, is a useful way of finding things out. What's the equivalent of the smoking debate now? What's the equivalent of the smoking debate now? What's that? Yeah, what is an example? No, so you're living in 2018, I'm living in 2018. When I go back to when I was a kid, smoking was the thing, Some people said it was bad and the tobacco said it was good for you. 2018? Weapons? Yeah. Where, you mean guns in America? Of course, guns in America is a very interesting discussion. Guns are bad, they kill people. You need to have guns because if you don't have guns, people will kill you. There's your two arguments. Of course, what the NRA do is they pour millions and millions and millions of dollars into this particular argument and they make advertisements to get animation people, no doubt. And then people, oh yeah, that's right. I watched an ad last night. There's this woman, she goes into, the husband's away, and she goes up to bed, and then there's somebody breaks in. You need a gun. There was an advertisement. This is a bit hard to demonstrate. I'm not an actor. There's people in a bed. There's a bed head. Where people often have the clock and all that? There's a thing which you can buy where your gun is here. So if somebody scares you, you just go. All right. So of course the guns is a big thing in America. What else? Probably a bigger thing. Marijuana, is marijuana good for you or bad for you? Yeah, good for you, bad for you. Is technology or social media good or bad for you? Yeah. The biggest one, of course, which we'll have a look at is climate change. Is there any climate change, or is climate change made up by somebody? That's it. It's exactly the same.